Okay, let's get started. I'm going to actually give the mic to Kristina to do a quick intro, and then we'll kick it off.
Yeah, okay, hello. My name is Kristina. I'm from Aura office. We are hosting this event, and I just want to thank you so much for coming out today. I hope for most of you it was a short walk, but for those of you that drove in from out of town, thank you so, so much. This is the first of what we hope to have for every single year events. We're going to try and find different topics on different trends that are relevant. And so today turned out pretty successful. Excuse me. So thank you so much. And yeah, I'll hand it over to Rocky. Let's get started.
Okay, so we're going to respect time. We're 7 minutes late, so maybe we might even expedite some of the questions and answers. But just a quick intro for who I am, for those of you who don't know me. I'm the founder of the Now of Work and the Now Academy. And it's a consulting firm and a school that teaches people and organizations on how to future-proof in our exponential times. And so it's kind of fitting that I'm moderating, because I think we can all agree that the battle for talent is only ramping up in every sector that you're in. And organizations are always looking to be more innovative, to be more agile, and just generally be more modern. And so, as Kristina was mentioning, on a quarterly basis, Tenant Talks will bring together thought leaders in the space of the modern workplace. And so today we're going to talk about one aspect of a modern workplace, which is remote working. So we'll start off right away with some intros. Maybe we'll start with Angie, and just give us your 1 minute pitch, who you are, who you work for, and yeah, a bit about you.
Sure. Hi, my name's Angie. I'm the Senior HR Business Partner at Visier. So at Visier, we are a people analytics and insights company helping companies make decisions using data and information. And in my role, I support a portfolio of employees and leaders that span Canada, US, and the UK. So about a fifth of our employees are working remotely across the 3 different countries.
Okay, Kraig.
Cool. Hi, everybody. My name is Kraig Doherty. I am the head of people and places, ironically, at Quietly. We're a full-service content marketing agency, both on the content strategy side and the content execution side. Our clients are global. Our footprint is global, given our freelancer networks, roughly 10,000 strong, that we engage with on a regular. A bit of background on me, nearly 20 years now on the HR talent side of things, specifically with tech and creative companies.
Okay, and Kristina.
Again, my name is Kristina. I'm with Aura office. We are a local office design build firm. We've been operating for over a decade now. And so what my role is the organizational development manager. And what that is reevaluating the company, looking at different systems, procedures, processes, and the way we do things, and try to stay relevant. So a lot of things like software changes are a big one. Everything is changing so quickly. Even policies like remote working. So it's constantly evaluating everything and seeing if we can run efficiently.
Okay, let's get started. In prepping for today, I was thinking back. It was 7 years ago that I had my first job working remotely. I live in White Rock, and at the time, 7 years ago, I was working in Cole Harbour. And I was able to work 1 day a week remotely, and it had a profound impact on my personal life. And I think we can probably agree that tech companies sort of forged the way towards making remote working more commonplace. And tech companies also are guilty of or celebrate the fact they come up with new solutions and new apps and new ways of thinking and fads even. Not all of them are going to stick. So my first question to the panel is remote working a fad, or is it here to stay? And Kraig, we'll start with you.
So let's just define remote work, maybe is a good place to start. Remote work, distributed teams, virtual operations, flexible work arrangements. I mean, it's not a fad, it's not a trend, it's not a perk, as you see sometimes listed, ironically, on some career sites. It's more of a lifestyle, really, more than anything. But it's really become the standard operating mode for 50% of companies in the United States, 48% of the companies in Canada. And ironically, people, Rocky, like yourself, 99% of people who have experienced remote work certainly want to continue to experience it or pepper it in terms of their own operating modes. So it's real. And the irony of it all is that as of 2018, it's become its own industry. Look where we are right now. So I think it really speaks to it being a thing, and it's something that if you're not being intentional with, you will definitely miss out on opportunities to attract and retain great talent.
Right. So WeWork's business model aside, because you guys been tracking their IPO, that's a whole other conversation, but you're saying, yes, it's not a fad. Angie, what do you think?
Definitely not. I actually think that it's something that's increasingly more common, especially Rocky, like yourself. 7 years ago, you moved further away from the city, and people are moving further and further away from the city because of the cost of living. So I actually think that in order for companies to be able to have employees want to work there, they need to have these flexible remote work arrangements. And as companies continue to grow globally, you're not going to be able to have offices in every single city you operate out of. And just with technology, it makes remote working a lot more feasible.
So I'm going to balance the anecdotal responses and narratives you guys have with some of the numbers I found online. Kraig, you actually just touched on one, but here are some facts. Buffer, they did a survey this year actually of 2,500 employees, of remote workers, and they found 99% said they wanted to work from home at least some of the time for the remainder of their career. And Kraig, what you just referenced was actually a report by Forbes. And Forbes said that remote working is now the standard operating procedure for 50% of US companies. And so I would agree it's not a fad. And so if we change then our questioning, not all companies have embraced this yet. And some are still having some challenges. And historically, at least in my experiences, founders, owners, executives have two impediments they're trying to resolve. Number one, how do we control our employees? How do we know they're actually doing work if we have people working remotely? And two, what is the impact on culture if all of a sudden people aren't at the office anymore? And so I'd love you guys to address one or two of those. And Kristina, we'll start with you.
To address this topic, I think I'll start off by saying that organizations need to look at the way they're functioning, the way they're measuring everything, and find a way to be more results-based. It's not how many hours a day your staff are sitting in their chairs. It's at the end of the week, are the KPIs and the goals that you set out, are they met? And so it changes the dynamic, and it's something that it takes a lot of getting used to. I think even in our organization, remote working is something fairly new. And the question always comes up is, are people doing their jobs? And so if you switch that mindset from, I need to physically see these people, to say, weekly, am I seeing my team deliver on what they're expected? That's going to create that trust. And so measuring tools is number one, and then communication is the second. And that sort of goes into your second question, Rocky, on remote working could easily erode your culture. Absolutely, that's not a question. And so the way to ensure that your culture is not ruined is by communication. And so at Aura, we have 2 different offices. We have different sites where people are on site working. And then on top of that, we offer remote working. And so the way we ensure our culture remains so strong is by daily huddles. Every single week, we have department meetings where everyone has to attend. Monthly, we have staff meetings where, again, everyone must attend. We do a high-level overview on what's going on at Aura. And then even quarterly, we take the time to take one day off. We all get together, and we go have fun together. We update each other on what's going on. So communication is so key. And so remote working isn't the evil in the company. It's the lack of communication, for sure.
Okay, so I'm going to pass it to Angie. But what I took from that is focus on getting shit done, not on controlling people, right? Angie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think I'll echo what some of Kristina said. I think the thing around whether they're actually working, the question that it's really rooted around trust. So if you don't trust your employees, even if they're walking by, sitting in front of their chair, it doesn't actually mean they're doing work. So some of the questions they should really be asking is, are they meeting maybe the project deadlines? What's the output and the quality of work is? So instead of measuring, the number of hours they're spending in front of their computer, it's about productivity. And I think in terms of culture, I think it's definitely takes more work. I think the leaders need to be more intentional about creating that culture as opposed to just assuming that everyone's going to be here and understand what the culture is like. They just have to, it takes more work and effort, and they need to be more intentional. And so, we have lots of leaders that are actually working remotely. They're not Vancouver based. And one of our senior director actually does a really good job. And whenever we do any type of meetings with him, he always pops up on video. So he's not just, Tyler on the phone. We actually really embrace him and his Star Wars posters. So we talk about how, it's Tyler in his Star Wars, home office. So, he really built that connection with the team, that being FaceTime with them over that video really helps with building that culture as well.
So maybe just a show of hands, how many of you here are here because you are interested in creating a remote working condition in your place but don't currently have that today? Okay, so actually not too many. How many of you have remote working as part of your organization's way of working? Okay, so the majority of you. Okay, that might change the way we answer some of our questions, but what I was going to talk about was that we live in this human-centric world now. We all talk about that, about human centricity and personalization. And I think one of the failures possibly is that we don't have that same lens with leadership, which we do with our customers and our team members. What happens when you've got most of your leaders who are in the baby boomer categories of most organizations still today, who have gone through linear change in their life, and now we're in times of exponential change. They were the ones who were trained and went to school in the industrial age where it was command and control, where it literally was building widgets, punch in, punch out. And so I think part of the story around getting remote working to be more embraced is to help leadership to become, or helping leadership along the journey themselves to understanding how the new workplace operates. And so here's my stat for this question. And I try to be as credible as possible. So I think most of us have heard of Stanford University. They did a 2-year study, and they found, surveying and tracking 500 workers who work both remotely and in traditional settings, that the productivity among home-based workers was equal to a full day work a week. And so this idea that are people at home just working in their cowboy jammies to be lazy, or are they actually getting shit done like you explained? This study actually says they're 20% more productive than those who are in the office. So pretty fascinating stuff. Okay, so it's not a fad. We've addressed some of the concerns of leadership. Let's talk about guidelines, because I think we can all agree a free-for-all in remote and flexible working might be a challenge in some organizations. Do any of you have experiences with creating guidelines or policies around remote working? Kraig, maybe you can answer that.
One quick note on the last question, Rocky, if I may. I loved how you say, Angie, you said about being intentional with sort of the points in which you can interject, whether it be through tools and technology, et cetera. The reality is remote work can create long-term or feeling of isolation for some. So there needs to be awareness around that and intentional methods around that. And the reality is it can have direct impact to your mental health. So while definitely productivity is through the roof as an organization and just looking at things through that human lens, it's like, what conditions can we then create? How can we best utilize technology? How can we best design our spaces? Or how we look at, again, leading it now to policies and approach, how can we best support the organization so that we can create that feeling? And I mean, it's just not through a digital tool, I think is what I'm getting at. Yeah, in terms of quietly, we're a relatively small organization, but what we try to do is not establish policy, more so framework, or at least goalposts. So people kind of know how we play. So really codifying a little bit of what you're talking about, especially key for new team members who are joining the team, especially key for remote workers who are on the other side of the world as to how they interact with our editorial team, our senior leadership teams, our regular meeting cadence, like all of those things. So case in point, if we are having a town hall or those types of things, we specifically carve out time for social interactions, mission critical, before we get into business. So like, while that seems so obvious, it's those types of sort of human interactions that I think sometimes are not captured within those guidelines. It's more load up Zoom, do this, do that, and it's not necessarily, again, through the human lens. So I think, really being key in observing the interactions that are happening in your own organizations, looking at whatever tools and tech and approaches you currently do have, and then shaping guidelines around that. So yeah, for us, I mean, it's a whole bunch of things. I've got it here in front of me. I'm not on Facebook, by the way. I'm looking at things. But we don't cover things like co-working costs. As an organization, we do have a home base, so we would encourage an individual certainly either work from home or work from where they need to, but we don't currently have a stipend or a set-aside budget that if you wanted to join, I guess there would be extenuating circumstances. We recently had a team member who relocated to London, England, who's just trying to figure out the way in which he wants to work and the way in which to interact best with our team. So we're letting that sort of just organically figure itself out, and then we'll react accordingly. So it's not prescriptive per se. Yeah. So that's how we've approached policy and guideline when it comes to remote work.
That's actually a really interesting point, because I know early on in the game, there was a big debate, just like when the smartphone came out. in the BlackBerry. It was like, now am I working 24/7? And as remote working started becoming more popular in the last decade, that was a big touching point. A big topic was, do we pay for their Wi-Fi at home, or a portion of? Do we pay for even the hardware at home? And what I'm hearing from you is that you're not. There is no stipend there. It's just an option for you to choose to.
I think it's being flexible. It's the nature of most organizations these days to be agile is a commonly used term in tech creative, but being open to have conversations on what is it that we can do as an organization to ensure you're better integrated into what it is that you do, and certainly what it is that we do. And so whether it be being intentional in all of these touch points, or whether it be, okay, well then let's talk about a stipend if we feel that that is going to be a key enabler for getting you to do your best work and perform at your best and doing what we need to do. Is that a we work out in White Rock, or like whatever it is, like, sorry, Spaces, my bad. If it's looking at something like that, then we'll do that.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say laptops are a big thing now too. Back in the day, it was all desktop. It was harder. Everyone's on laptops, let's be honest, and phones and that. So, and it wasn't touched on, but I would give you one piece of advice is that if you are starting out, just 1 day a week. That's all it's got to be. Give your team an option 1 day a week and test it from there. And try it for yourself. Yeah, you bet. Okay, so Kraig, you talked about intentionality, and actually you touched on office design. So actually I want to go there. I want to know, what do you guys think the link is between remote workers and office design? And Angie, we'll start with you.
Sure, yeah. So I mentioned we have actually a lot of remote workers at Visier. So in our office, we actually combine technology into it. We have specific Zoom rooms where it makes it easy for teams that have remote employees to have a bigger meeting as opposed to just popping up in front of a laptop. That's not the best experience. So in the Zoom rooms, we've got a giant screen TV for people remoting in. They can actually see the entire meeting room, and that has been super helpful. And then we also have now it's like phone booths and smaller meeting spaces, because not everybody is going to be in the office. So just having options to have the right size space to have different types of meetings. And then we also have dedicated hotel desks for when people need to come into the office, they feel like they have somewhere they can actually work and know where to go.
Kristina, what are your thoughts?
So we come across this a lot, especially with our clients. Q4 of 2018, a Collier's report came out that stated 4.5% vacancy in Vancouver. What that essentially means is that you can't move. You're stuck with what you are. You want to grow, but the physical space isn't there. And so what we've had to do with our clients is get really, really creative with the space you already have. And so different companies have adopted some remote working policies. But one thing we are trying to introduce is sort of breaking down that hierarchy. So what people are used to is, as your career progresses, you get your office, and then you get the corner office, and then all of a sudden your office has a sofa in it. And then your physical space just keeps growing as your career progresses. And so that's the more traditional approach, what we're used to. And we're trying to take a step back and say, if we can break down those walls and everybody within the organization is equal, we can start removing those perimeter offices, move them within the core of the space, and then have everybody sort of working agilely, as we mentioned before. So the first step would be to sort of break that hierarchy, and that's definitely not easy. It requires a lot of change management. It requires a mindset change. And so I want to reference Aura again. We are moving our office. We are going just a block down, maintaining our office in the downtown core. And what we're doing is just a complete open space with different departmental areas. There will be private areas where you can work. And so what's important to note here is that no one is going to have their assigned desk or assigned office. Even our CEO, Dan, he keeps saying, he's like, I will not have a desk. I will come in, meet with who I need to meet with, and then finish off the day doing emails on the kitchen island or something like this. So it's definitely related. Within this tight market, we have to get creative with what we're doing with our space.
Yeah, and Kraig, before Kraig, you answer, I mean, there's a whole tenant talk just on office design, let's be honest, right?
Yeah.
And so that's going to be a future one, right? Yeah. Okay, Kraig, how about you? Do you want to answer your...
Sure. Just an updated stat to what you shared from Collier's, because that was Q4 2018. The situation's actually gotten worse. So in Q2 2019, office vacancies down to 2.6% in downtown Vancouver. And out our way, Rocky, it's around 6%. So the point is, it is a thing. We know that average rents price per square foot around $30-ish plus operating. It's a significant cost. So we need to rethink things, but specifically around office design, companies need to focus less around square footage and number of meeting rooms and focus more around the interactions or the work habits or the relationships that we want to create. And I think because of these limitations of space and or cost, I would love to have the budget for Zoom meeting rooms, but that's just not a reality for 90% of the tech businesses in British Columbia who are 10 or less people. So if that's the case, then we need to look at it through a new lens. And that, to me, would be engaging an Aura or engaging a Rocky through a design thinking workshop to try and reimagine how we work. So yes, remote work is part of that equation. It's not the only part. It's one of many things. But then really looking holistically at, do we really need the 6 boardrooms we currently have? How do we utilize those currently? There's a real sense of permanence with construction in terms of walls and things and frickin' permits that you gotta wait for forever around plumbing and electrical and all the stuff. So it's like, okay, can we rethink the way in which we work? And I think that you do need to take a step back. I think you do need to check your ego and truly ask yourself if you need the 10,000 square feet that everyone else has, because those footprints alone are disappearing, as we know. Yeah,
so those are amazing points, and it's hard for me not to reel us back, because the whole conversation about modern workplaces is it's huge. When you start to say those things, Kraig, like I think about the modern workplace, what are we trying to invoke? We want to create space where people are collaborating more, cross-functionally. We want to instill more agility into our work, have more innovation. We talk about serendipitous collisions, where people just naturally, because you're breaking bread together or playing ping pong together, these aren't gimmicks. These are ways that modern companies are ideating and can be more innovative. And so it's hard to reel in, but let's sort of get back into just remote working, because I know, just for the audience sake, here's a couple of stats. And Colin, raise your hand over there, because we've been referencing Colliers all day. If you're looking for space, talk to Colin. There you go. Boom. Okay, here's some facts. Kraig, you touched costs. The average real estate savings for employers with full-time remote workers is $10,000 per employee every year. So when you factor it, this is the cost savings to the company. Remote workers save on average, this is a US stat, remote workers save about $7,000 a year. And so these are things, whether it's commuting, food, clothing, childcare, and we haven't even talked about environmental impact. And so remote working has some really significant impact on the bottom line of both organizations and employees. Okay, let's pass it back to Kristina, because you're on a roll here with office design. Talk to me, does a physical design of an office foster behavioral changes in an organization?
Absolutely. I personally spent 6 months writing a dissertation on this topic, and there are countless studies that will tell you lighting, air temperature, and air quality are the biggest factors in any environment that affects your mood. But I want to go further than that, because I think that's just the norm now. And what I want to touch base on just is your overall happiness in the office. And so I was watching a video on Miller Thompson. I don't know if many of you are familiar with their space, but these are lawyers that work in a completely open concept area. And so what the video was saying is, you go to your office, you close the door, and if you're having a bad day, nobody sees you for the entire day. And when you leave, you're still in that bad mood, and you take that home with you. So when you start breaking down those walls a little bit, what happens is you start engaging with people, you start making friends at work, and as much as you think you don't really want to talk about it, it always helps. And so once you start meeting people in the office, you're forming friendships, and there are so many studies, which, I could go on forever, but forming friendships and relationships at work are very, very important to your overall satisfaction in the workplace. And so I want to quote Winston Churchill, which is going to sound really weird, but bear with me. And what he says is, we make our buildings and then they make us. And that triggered me, because if you think about it, look at our homes. We design our homes to be safe and comfortable, and therefore we're happy when we go home. Why do we not do that the same thing to our office space? You want to go there, you want to feel comfortable and happy, and overall you're just going to be more productive in that sense.
So what I take is break down both literal and figurative walls.
Absolutely.
In the workplace.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're all tracking here. So again, it's not a fad. You're breaking down some of the myths. Office design plays a big role. But what about tech and non-tech in terms of solutions to keep people engaged and communicating and feeling part of that team and culture? Can you guys talk? We'll start with Angie. Can you talk about some of the tech and non-tech solutions you use to ensure the culture is alive and communicating well?
Yeah, so we use Slack quite a bit in our company. So Slack could be really good, also obviously really bad and really big distraction. But with each of our teams, almost every team has their own Slack channel where they are constantly communicating. We have fun Slack channels as well. One of our most popular Slack channel is the Doggos channel. So it gives people a sense of, even if you're not in the office, you can socialize with people. They share pictures of their dogs and have conversations so they don't feel as isolated. And then, something that I've touched on previously, whenever we have remote coworkers having meetings, again, it's encouraging that video function. Once you pop on video, then, you break down any type of silos, especially if you are working, you were mentioning kind of from a psychological perspective, you're working at home by yourself all the time and just on these calls, not seeing faces and people. Having that video function, everybody popping on, makes a huge difference. I have one of our teams that has probably half remote employees, half not, so there's about 20 of them, and yesterday I was on a team call with them, and everybody popped up on that Zoom video. We use the gallery function. They call themselves a Brady Bunch, and it's really culturally one of the best things that they can do for their teams to stay connected.
Awesome. I'm going to let Kraig answer first before I tell you guys a lesson I learned from Kraig at my last job. But Kraig, why don't you answer first?
I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier. You said 3 tenets are important. There was air, light, and what else was the third? Awesome. Cool. And I find it ironic that usually companies' default is sort of the minimum code. Right, whereas if we're looking to sort of engage and create nurturing environments, then why aren't we stopping and engaging in Aura to sort of say, okay, given the space, given site conditions, given all the things, but given our culture and what we want to deliver to our people, how can we utilize technology in terms of building design and nuance, et cetera, whether it be background music or whatever it may be, to create the best environment possible for when people have to be at work. So I just wanted to pause there because I think that's super, super important. In terms of tech, yeah, we're tech creative. We nerd it out for sure. Slack's a thing. We use Hangouts Meet predominantly, so we're a Google shop. If you are paying for Google Business, this is different from Hangouts. So there's Hangouts and there's Hangouts Meet. Hangouts Meet is badass, and it's no discount to Zoom. Zoom's great as well, but we've found, so I'll just give you one brief example. We have individuals who are hard of hearing, and sometimes we are on client calls, all the time, and it has automatic closed captioning live. Hugely powerful when it comes to this, included with tools like this. So this is a great example of sort of whether it be remote work or otherwise, where a tool can absolutely fundamentally change someone's life in terms of listening for client nuances. And yeah, you could argue sometimes the translation's a bit off, but quite literally, like 98% of the time, it's on, and it's really impressive. We utilize, as far as projects and things like that, tools like Asana, Trello. We use Lattice for our people development platform. Humi's our sort of HRIS vacation platform. GitHub for our devs and whatnot. They utilize that. Everything I'm mentioning is cloud-based, of course. Non-tech, again, we talked about this earlier. So it's important to come back to it, which is intentional space for human interaction. So the Brady Bunch vibe kind of thing. And on Slack, by the way, we have our channel called Quietly Fluff, not Doggos, but yes, we're much the same. But the other point to cover finally is, I think for all of this to work is training. So remote work requires a new set of skills that most may or may not have. And so whether that be self-management, online etiquette, intentional rituals that are codified, these are things that you kind of got to stop and pause for a moment and sort of say, well, what are our desired outcomes here? And then how do we enable the team globally to be able to think in that way and show up in that way? Because I'm sure we've all been there, and even interview settings, just as an example, where we have somebody extremely quiet that's in the corner and asks these badass questions, but just peppers in every now and then, versus it's just a style thing, and it's just the way in which they've come up and who they've learned from.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so many gold nuggets there. Raise your hands. How many of you use Slack in your workplace? Okay, so almost half. How many use Teams or another instant messaging? Okay. So my learning from Kraig, actually. So Slack, if you use it right, what they'll tell you is that you could reduce emails by somewhere to 40 to even 60%. I remember Kraig and I worked together, and I started getting pretty fired up about all the channels and all the cat channels and shit. And I was like, fuck, this would drive me nuts. So Kraig had to coach me, and there's like these little hacks. Not even hacks. But it's just, there actually is a way to manage Slack so it's not overwhelming. So if any of you think that Slack is just becoming a distraction and it takes you away from your work and you can't focus, and I encourage you to talk to someone like Kraig or Slack or whoever about how to use it right. Because it absolutely can be a distraction if let loose, like I was let loose at one time. But if you have the discipline around it, then it's absolutely game-changing. So on this point, I wanted to pivot because we couldn't ask every question, but I pulled up some stats around remote working and diversity. So we all know the diversity game is topical today. So here are some interesting facts. 76% of women surveyed who work in technology said remote working is necessary to attract and maintain females in the tech industry. This is coming 76% of women. Employers who offer remote working, I think someone touched on this. You now are opening up to talent outside of your borders. And so now if you're having challenges finding talent in Vancouver, hire someone in Kelowna, in Victoria, in Calgary, in Toronto, in India. Remote working, when done right, now opens you up to a world of diversity and skill sets. This number actually surprised me. It's a little lower than I thought, but it's 68% of millennials. And now the Gen Zers say remote working is one of their top decisions for joining a company. Still, 68 is pretty high, but it's one of their top 3 reasons that they would join a company. And then to take that over to other generations, even though it's the younger generation that seek it the most, the prediction by Upwork is that in the next 5 years, 73% of teams in North America will have remote working in their office spaces. So this again goes back to the fact this is not a trend. This is not a fad. This is playing so many from your mental health to diversity reasons. Remote working is here to stay. Okay, so we got a time constraint. So I'm going to go rapid fire now. I'm going to ask the panelists a question, and they've got 20 seconds to answer these questions for you guys. So we'll see how impactful they can be. Kristina, we're going to start with you, and then we'll move over to Kraig and then Angie for this one. And the question is, outside of the obvious, production workers and nurses, et cetera, can any type of business sector leverage remote working? Go.
Yes. There's a woman named Samantha Lambert. She works for a company called Blue Fountain Media. And what she said is 10 years ago, the only remote workers were customer service or telemarketers working minimum wage. And that was 10 years ago. So within 10 years, we now have 70% of global professionals doing 1 day a week from home. And so if we can accomplish that within 10 years, there's no reason, with the change of technology and how fast it's changing, there's no reason why a professional services company, no matter the size or location, can't take on remote working. Am I up?
Yeah, you're up.
Oh,
but
okay.
you did say professional services, and we have professional services in the house. I'm glad you mentioned that. Absolutely. Okay, who's next? Can any sector benefit from?
Yes, absolutely. A couple of weeks ago, I actually used the virtual doctor app to see my doctor. So if I can do something like that, I think any industry, you can try that.
I was just going to reference TELUS Babylon for something like that. I think it's badass. It's free. MSP, of course, your companies are covering that cost come January. So I mean, the point is it's free. You should use it. I have nothing else to add. I mean, you guys hit it on the head. The only thing I would be mindful of is being intentional around practitioner-based industries, whether it be the likes of doctors, but also like as a chiro, I don't think I can work remote. How am I going to crack your back? To veterinary folks, and so on and so. There are industries where again we need to look at the way in which they work, and then how in which we can pepper in remote work, and when that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a badass answer, by the way. Come on, he said badass like 5 times today. It's a joke. Lighten up. Come on, that was badass. Okay. So here's some fast facts. This is Gartner. Gartner said by 2020, that's next year, that organizations that have choose your own work style will boast employee retention rates of more than 10% over average. 74% of 1,000 workers that were surveyed by SoftChoice said they would leave their current job for another if they had an option to work remote. And FlexJobs did a survey that said 97% of the workforce said a job with flexibility would have a huge improvement or positive impact on their quality of life, not their work. Okay, the next rapid fire, or not just their work. The next rapid fire question is, oh, well, easy. What's your one single piece of advice? And we'll start with Angie. Around remote working, that is.
Sure, yeah. I think if you have some employees who are new to remote working, I always encourage them to go chat with somebody who's done remote working before to get some tips and advice, because we have lots of people who've never done remote work before, lots of people who've got years of experience doing remote work. They have lots of kind of idea sharing and just mentoring on what remote working looks like, because it's a lifestyle change. It's lots of learning and different things and how to interact with the team. So pair them up with somebody that they can chat with.
Love that. Mentoring, reverse mentoring, and Kraig, you mentioned earlier as well, training. Love it. Kristina.
Because I do a lot of HR work, I would say hire the right people. Reevaluate your core values and make sure you're hiring people to fit those core values. And then once you start trusting your employees, you're going to be able to adopt things like remote working. And the other thing I'll say is, this remote working doesn't have to be set forever. Do a trial run. Do a month of remote working. See if your staff like it and if you guys are still being efficient as an organization. If that works out, do another month. And then keep going until you decide, is this something for my organization or not? So,
Kristina, I'm going to actually touch on that before Kraig answers, is that in our work, we help a lot of organizations to adopt remote working. So here are the stats. And so we've done this now with over a dozen companies that we transitioned their entire workforce into remote working. We started out with 1 day a week. And for 3 months, people can work up to 1 day a week remotely. After 3 months, what percentage, and someone just yell out some percentages, what percentage of the workforce do you think worked remotely on a regular basis after 3 months? Throw out some numbers. What percentage? 90? 80? 98 high. The number, so the key here was, and I kind of Jedi mind tricked you here, is that it was on a regular basis every single week. The number was 30%. And what we've learned through studying is that it wasn't about necessarily working from home, it was about choice. Is that trust me? That's when you said trust. I have a choice. If I'm have to get some work done that requires me to work alone in isolation, or if I'm not just feeling 100% today, give me the choice to work. But what's been profound in this study, that informal study we've been doing, is it's proof that people actually like to collaborate. People actually like to work with people, but they want choice in their life. And the personalization of how you work is actually what matters, not saying you work 1 day a week from home. Okay, so trust is huge. And Kraig, what's your 20-second one piece of advice?
I like how you're limiting me on time already. No, I'm just playing. For me, I think you've touched on it in pieces, but asking your team how they want to work. So yeah, we can do the 1 day beta thing, and I'm all for that for sure, to sort of test, but why can't we just pause for a moment, create the space to have the conversation, and really get into the nuts and bolts of your company? And yeah, that may take a little bit longer for larger organizations, but I think gathering that data on the outset is imperative as to sort of how you set various approaches to either be remote work or any program for that matter.
I love that. What problem are we actually trying to solve, right? Otherwise, it could just be a Band-Aid and a fad, right? So that would be the rigor you should put behind it, actually. Okay, so a couple of quick facts again, because I'm on a roll here before we open up to the audience. I referenced that Stanford study earlier about 1 day a week productivity increase. That same study showed that there was a 50% decrease in attrition with those companies that had remote working. So you actually had less turnover. And then someone touched on well-being. It's actually now endorsed remote working by the American Psychological Association, that have now come out openly to say that control over work can reduce stress and enhance motivation and growth. And they're now pushing hard for all employers in America to adopt a remote working. So it sounds like we're maybe a little bit biased up here. We're all proponents of remote working. It's because we are. But what I'd love to do now is to open it up to the audience. So ask us those hard questions. Ask us things that are lingering, or ask us anything you want to dig deeper into. We've got about 10 minutes in which we can take some audience questions. Okay, do we have a runner with a mic? Okay.
Just a quick question. So obviously there's been a debate for a very long time in terms of open concept, closed concept. Oh, no, that didn't work. Now let's go back to, and back and forth. And is there a happy medium established yet? What does the actual physical space for the head office look like that people can hub around? You mentioned that nobody has designated offices, but at the same time, is everyone sitting there with headphones on? There's been a lot of studies that say the true open concept where everyone's working side by side, shoulder to shoulder, is not productive either. So what does that look and feel like?
Okay, so I'll let you go first.
There's a big misconception, I think, when it comes to the open concept. People think you just break down every single wall and all of a sudden throw in 100 desks. And so what we want to encourage is a different mindset around the hybrid working area. So you're definitely going to have boardrooms. You need to have meeting spaces. You're going to have meeting rooms, but they are not assigned. So then what you do is you create a system. Somebody needs this room for this hour, the second hour. And then you create a more hybrid approach where you've got your different departments. You have private booths if you need them. You have calling booths if you need them. And so, unfortunately, when people hear open concept, they're picturing a Facebook warehouse. That's kind of how they tend to work. It is proven that it's definitely distracting. Just having your headphones in isn't going to give you the focus that you do need. So it's looking at more of a hybrid approach. And so we do have some of our designers here, and they are the masters in this sort of an area, so they can answer maybe some questions for you in terms of what does that look like in terms of a floor plan or even adjustable walls and things like that. Rocky, you wanted to add something?
You can't please everybody. It's very clear. I think we all need to acknowledge that we tend to work differently throughout the day. And so what I've seen most organizations doing now is it's less about leaning to one or the other and more embracing this notion of work zones or work styles. So you'll have very intentional, quiet spaces. You'll have spaces that are collaborative, meant to be meeting-based, 2, 3, 5, 10, etc. So it really varies in terms of your work style throughout the day. Standing room only. I mean, all of these types of things, depending on the size of the organization and the footprint you have. But that's coming back to the human interaction side of things. Defining how we work or how we want to work needs to be where you start. Because you can't just assume, to your point, that everybody wants to be in an office, or certainly, and you have tech to thank for this, be in a big open space, because that's kind of the way it was there for quite a long time.
So the only thing I would add to that is pragmatically what Kraig's talking about is actually have your teams audit how they work. And I know when you worked at Event-Based, I think they spent 2 months. For 2 months, track how often are you in deep thought and flow at your desk? How often are you in meetings? How often are you collaborating with and actually understand this is not a guess? Actually go out and audit it and see how people work. And then that will inform the open concept, the hybrid that we're all aligned to. It's absolutely about a hybrid. Okay, another question?
You mentioned like 1 day a week, 2 days a week, but with the cost of living in Vancouver, our company's finding more and more people moving farther away, like Vancouver Island or in the interior, so it's a lot more cost prohibitive to come in that frequently. Have you found or have you seen studies that recommend a certain frequency of being physically in the office for those types of remote workers to ensure that collaboration continues and that culture stays there?
You want that? Yes, you want it?
I was going to say, so we actually, for us, we only have a real office here in Vancouver, and we have employees kind of all across the world. So we have lots of employees that aren't even coming in those couple of days a week. And that's why we have, I know you were mentioning sometimes it takes a larger company to have those budget to have those type of Zoom rooms. And for us, those were critical because we have employees that can't come in once a week and it's not even just possible. So for us, we have monthly town halls, and in there we have good technology solution because 1/5 of our employees aren't coming into the office, not even once a week. We really all get together in person once a year because of the global footprint that we have. So it's about enabling those technology solutions that you can have employees to never come into the office at all.
I think a lot of this centers around, Rocky, you and I talked about this even when we worked together, the traditions of your organization and the cadence of how, as a company, you come together, whether you're remote or not. So whether that be Monday stand-ups in the case of 1-800-GOT-JUNK, or whatever those traditions are as an organization, then it's factoring in this notion of remote work and how we can be intentional about incorporating those remote working resources on a global scale into those traditions. So I think you'll find if you're mapping some of that out, it'll start to inform some of what you're getting at, that, you know what, quarterly as an organization of our size, maybe we should invest in flying everyone in, or whatever that thing is. Certainly if you have the means and the budget to make it happen, that's always a good thing.
So the quasi-science says it's annually in person, and if you believe in that data that was shown, $10,000 a year saving per employee by having it, to fly someone out to Vancouver once a year to build that team, I think there's a ROI play there. And then it's quarterly for micro teams, and so that you would bring them together is the quasi-science that I've heard. There was another point, but I lost it. So let's maybe go another question before yeah. It was really profound, like really profound. Yeah, question.
Sorry, what you said just now about the $10,000 in benefits actually is a good segue to my question. So I agree with you that for local employees, remote work has all the benefits you said, but when we're talking about other jurisdictions, how do you align the compliance cost, the incorporating a new company, flying those people here, those costs add up very quickly, and then you run into risk of being non-compliant with penalties and stuff. So how have you managed that? Does it make sense to have only one employee per jurisdiction, for example?
Speak just to a recent example. Totally hear you. Thank you for asking the question. So that individual I referenced earlier, relocating to London, England, health insurance. So the MSP equivalent over there via third party, about $600-700 a month, let's say. And so, yeah, that's real for sure. I think you have to, again, take a step back and look holistically. We know we find ourselves in a talent shortage situation. We know we need to be thinking differently in how we obtain and embrace that talent on a global scale. Some of that is opportunity cost, and it's the cost of, frankly, paying to play. If you can't afford to pay to play, then you do have to look a little bit more strategically as to sort of how you're tapping into the workforce, how you engage with remote workers. Maybe it is only remote workers within Canada versus overseas or whatever it may be. So I think it is asking those questions. And I think in the case of salespeople, they're globally. So I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, so I think it's figuring out for your company strategically what makes sense. For us, we needed salespeople all across the US because that's majority where our customers and our potential customers are. So we've actually engaged with a third party who has US payrolling in all states as an HR partner for us. It's a company called Insperity. They're actually our client and our vendor. So we work with them because I literally will have an employee in each state with, we have over 50 US employees, kind of almost every employee in every state. It's not functionally possible for our HR, payroll, and finance team to support something like that.
Does that answer your question, Ish? Okay. Is there another question out there? Yeah, one in the front.
Going back to a point I think, Kraig, you said about training earlier, what are some of the baseline rules and etiquette that you've had to establish in creating the culture around remote work?
Hold on, let me log in. I wrote that down.
He's gonna.
So, I mean, some of them are like consistent scheduled check-ins, show and tells. Like these are the intentional bits that you're getting at. We have to train in some cases around, Rocky's great at, for instance, around developing cadences around OKR methodology. So in other words, setting explicit expectations and deliverables, that's, I'd say, critical. So like everyone should have this regardless. If you don't have that, therein lies even more of a challenge. But specifically with remote work, I think it's all about managing expectations. Adding that personal touch to every interaction. And so then being clear and codifying kind of what that means for your organization without getting overly prescriptive. And I say that intentionally because that's why I hate using the term policy. And I know we try and cover it and call it guidelines or kind of whatever. But again, if you've done the initial work in terms of defining how as an organization you work, if you've taken a step back and created space just to observe how people are interacting, then you can see what are the best tools to use, what are the best methodologies, and so on and so forth. And then again, the right kind of rule set or guidelines to sort of develop that, which then informs training.
I think I understood your question. Another one I see a lot of is having set hours. Like this is well, it's not nuanced actually. It's between 10 and 2. So you work remotely, you work flexible, whatever it is, but you're available for instant, like immediate communication by video between a certain hours. That's another guideline that I see some people use initially to start to socialize this idea of what the responsibilities you take on when you're working remotely. That's one that comes to my mind. Okay, we had a question at the back. And so you walk back there, I think one of my points was that there is a difference between a full-time remote worker and a part-time one. In other words, one that does 1 or 2 days a week. I know there's a gentleman in the audience here who's 5 days a week, 100% remote. That's where the loneliness issues can come way more into play than the one that has just the options. And so there's a totally different narrative around remote working if it's full-time or not. Dan?
So if I'm an LA or legal assistant, how do I work remotely with the lawyer that I'm assisting? How does that work?
So you are did I hear that right? An EA in LA for a lawyer who is...
No, in LA, so legal assistant.
Oh, legal is...
For a lawyer, how does that work? Because if that role is constantly communicating, right? So how does that work when you're at home in your pajamas?
Do you guys want to take a stab at that, or do you want to ask someone in the audience even?
I mean, you'd start by asking, first, I would hope the individual knows the lawyer. Actually, let's assume that they don't. I'd fly down to meet the person, understand how they want to work together. That's my first point. And sort of understanding even their aptitude, understanding, depending on the age and or generation of that individual, how they embrace technology, because there's no point in introducing tech if there's resistant to certainly doing so. Are they still using books and paper and all of that good stuff? So I think it's first understanding your audience, basic marketing 101, and then in determining how best we can collaborate, work together, make use of tools, so that distance becomes a non-factor. That's how I would approach it.
Okay, another question? Over the front.
Thanks. So I'm the fellow that Rocky mentioned. I work from home 5 days a week, and I chose that intentionally when I chose this career. But the organization forced all their employees to go remote a couple of years, and I'm a pro remote worker, so I just want to caveat that. But I'm curious. You talked about loneliness, Kraig. What other negative sides of the equation when organizations are saying, "Hey, let's jump on this trend of remote work," without really consulting, how individuals are working? What else are you seeing other than loneliness that we should be out for? And my second part is, I'm curious, have you not brought in an employee to your organization because it was remote? Are there individuals that say, "I want an office space and I don't want to join your organization"?
So, yeah.
I mean, we've had employee turnover because we don't have an office in the location they're in, and they decided that, after working with us remotely for a year, 100% of the time, they decided it wasn't right for them. So it is a lifestyle choice that whether or not it's right for them. I mean, we do fly our employees out all together once a year, all to Vancouver. As well, our sales team do a quarterly meeting where they are flying to not a Vancouver location because they're mostly US based, to a different location. So we do bring them together all the time. But I think ultimately, to your point, it is a personal decision on whether or not working remotely 100% of the time is right for you, and it's not for everybody.
And sometimes you need to try it, to your point, to sort of figure that out. I'm going to pull some stats out, Rocky. Gallup study, 15 million people surveyed that have a best work buddy are 7 times as likely to be more engaged with their job. So that's a thing. So how can we create that digitally? It's a real challenge. And so having worked with a ton of founders and startups and whatnot, another challenge would be, how do you create enthusiasm around growing a business without ample social engagement? Sometimes it's the thrill of being in that room and kind of knowing all the things and the struggle that, it's required at times to feel an emotional connection to what's going on. So therein lies something you need to be aware of, as whether it be a founder or certainly a senior executive within an organization. yeah, these are the sort of two key tenets, I would think, for me in terms of challenges that you should be aware of, for sure.
You know, in the end, it comes back to, I suspect, knowing a lot of the audience members, you're all hyper-focused on this personalization of services to your customers. Just apply the same thinking. Understand your team members. Understand how they work. Personalize it to them. It's about choice. It's not a broad stroke. But I think what we've all landed on, it's not a fad. This is about choice. This is about creating a new modern workplace, getting more diverse workplaces, and ultimately being a company that's getting shit done and not one that's just constantly looking out over their people in the old command and control way. So I think on that note, unless there's one other burning question out there, raise your hand if there is. And if not, I think just to respect everyone's time, we'll call it an end, give them applause. But if you have any other questions offline, feel free to come up and let us know. But thank you all for your time and attention. And we got one last parting word from Kristina. Yes.
I just want to touch base on when it comes to the redesign of your office, especially if you're going to work more agilely. What used to happen is leaders just pick a design, construction happens, and you let your staff run loose. What really needs to happen now is if you're going to give that staff a choice, to participate in sort of the redesign of the space. So like Rocky said, you want to hold workshops. You want to see how your staff work. Some organizations, like for us at Aura, we have a few staff that we want to be 100% at the office. We don't even want the remote option. So once you know how your staff are working, you let them participate in the redesign of the space. And then what's really, really key is once that design is done, you train your staff how to use that space. So like that first question you mentioned, you want to train them on like, these are the focus areas, these are the collaborative areas, these are the social areas. And it sounds a bit funny, but it's changing the way you work every single day. So that training component at the very end of a design is so, so important. And so we're doing that with our clients now, where we hold discovery workshops, we survey all the staff. Everyone has a choice now, rather than it just stopping at leadership or even your management level. Yeah.
Okay, you give a hand to our panel. Okay, so we're free if anyone wants to pop by and answer questions. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Rocky.